I was halfway through my weekend oil change when I heard the sharp screech of heels on concrete. I didn't even need to look up. That sound only meant one thing on our street. Olivia Fairgrove, our HOA president, was locked onto her next target, and today, apparently, it was me. "Jason Keller," she barked like a chihuahua with a megaphone. "This is absolutely unacceptable." I wiped my hands off with an old rag and stood up from under my '88 Bronco. The thing was parked squarely in my driveway, not even brushing the edge of the alley behind my garage. I raised an eyebrow. "Morning, Olivia," I said calmly. "Something wrong," she shoved a clipboard in my face. "You are obstructing the community alley. That is a direct violation of Section 4, Article 17 of the HOA Charter. Effective immediately, you're being fined $250. I looked past her at the alley, which was wide enough to drive a fire truck through and completely clear behind my property. My Bronco wasn't anywhere near it. "My truck's entirely on my lot," I said flatly. "You can see the property marker right there." I pointed at the small metal stake embedded in the grass. Olivia clicked her tongue. "The HOA defines the alley boundary a few feet inward to allow for emergency vehicle clearance." "That's not what the county plat says," I replied. "Oh, please," she scoffed. "Don't start pretending you know zoning law." I didn't respond. I just pulled out my phone, scrolled to the PDFs I downloaded a few months back when Olivia tried to make me move my shed, and brought up the official property map. I held it out for her. "Right here," I said, tapping the screen. "My lot ends here, the alley starts here, I'm not blocking anything." But Olivia wasn't interested in facts. She scribbled something on her clipboard, tore off the pink slip, and slapped it against my garage door with a piece of duct tape. "You have 72 hours to pay or the fee will double," she said, spinning on her heel. "Olivia," I called after her, "you're going to regret this." She paused just for a second before continuing down the alley like some deranged mall cop. I dealt with her antics before: random inspections, threats over lawn height, even a cease and desist for putting up a basketball hoop outside of communal aesthetics. But this was different. This time I had proof and, more importantly, a plan. What Olivia didn't know was that I'd recently installed a full set of motion-activated security cameras, not just for the alley, but every angle of my property. The HOA had a nasty habit of bending truth around anonymous complaints, and I'd gotten tired of playing defense. That night I reviewed the footage. Sure enough, my truck never crossed the property line, not once. I clipped the video, saved the timestamp, and printed the county plat map with the lot lines clearly marked. I wasn't just going to appeal the fine. I was going to expose her entire game, and that was just the beginning. Monday morning came with a thick fog and the faint grind of someone dragging a trash bin across gravel. I was already outside, coffee in hand, waiting. Not for trash pickup, Olivia had scheduled an emergency HOA board meeting at her house, the kind of thing she only did when she was trying to push through something fast and quietly. I'd caught wind of it through Steve, one of the board members who worked overnights at the post office. He hadn't said much, just that Olivia was cooking something and I should be ready, so I was. I walked across the cul-de-sac. Past the hedges Olivia had trimmed into the shape of eagles for the 4th of July, and up the walkway that led to her wraparound porch. The door was open. Inside, 5 folding chairs surrounded her living room coffee table, where a notebook and a stack of forms sat beside a tray of untouched muffins. "Jason," Olivia said, blinking like she hadn't expected me to show up. "This is a closed meeting." "I'm here to dispute a fine," I said. Under Article 6, Section 3 of the Charter, homeowners can present evidence at any board hearing where their property is discussed. You know that. She hesitated, then gestured vaguely toward an empty chair. "Fine, make it quick." I didn't sit. I reached into my folder and handed a printed still from the security footage to each board member. In it, my Bronco was clearly parked within the boundary line, the timestamp matching the day and hour Olivia claimed I was blocking the alley. "I also brought a copy of the county's GIS plat map," I said, handing that out too. My property ends here, the vehicle never crossed it, that alley she's referencing, that's public easement. The HOA doesn't have jurisdiction over it. One of the board members, a quiet woman named Lena who usually kept her head down during meetings, squinted at the map. These stakes line up with what I see when I walk my dogs, she said slowly. This shows his vehicles on his lot. Olivia's jaw clenched. The HOA has the authority to define usage boundaries when safety is involved. Sure, I said, but not to override county zoning, and especially not to issue fines that aren't backed by code. I spoke with a land use attorney yesterday. You're operating outside your authority. She stood up suddenly, knocking her chair into the wall. You're twisting this. I also contacted the county zoning office this morning, I interrupted, pulling out another sheet. They confirmed the alley is recognized as public right-of-way and not subject to HOA enforcement. So unless you've got something stronger than that, this fine is baseless. For a moment, nobody said anything. Then the board's treasurer, an older man named Carl who'd once been sued by Olivia over a flagpole, leaned forward. Did you issue this fine before verifying the property line? She didn't answer. Instead, she turned to me with a tight smile. The fine will be withdrawn. I want it in writing, I said. You'll get it. I stayed where I was. And I want the letter sent to all homeowners clarifying that the HOA doesn't regulate the alley. That's not necessary, she said. It is if I have to file a complaint with the county attorney's office. Her nostrils flared, but she nodded once. I left without another word. By Wednesday, a memo was emailed to all residents clarifying that the alley was outside HOA enforcement. But that wasn't the end of it. Because 2 days later, Steve from the board handed me something quietly while I was raking leaves. A copy of an internal HOA memo Olivia had circulated to the board only. It showed she'd been planning to push for a new policy granting the HOA expanded visual easement rights over private property bordering shared spaces. She'd already drafted the language and even included a section that would allow board members to issue fines without photographic evidence if observed firsthand. The kicker: that policy was scheduled for a vote at the next general meeting. No homeowner had been notified yet. Where'd you get this? I asked Steve. She left it in the copier tray at the clubhouse, he said. Didn't even think to check. That night, I scanned everything. The draft policy, the time-stamped footage from my cameras, the zoning office email, and even a voice memo I'd recorded at the board meeting, where Olivia had admitted the fine wasn't backed by code. I compiled it all into a neat little file and sent it to every homeowner in the neighborhood with a subject line that read, "Ever been fined without proof? Read this." The next HOA meeting was standing room only. People who hadn't attended in years showed up, clutching printed copies of the documents I'd sent. Retirees, young families, even the guy who ran the corner taco truck. Olivia looked like she'd swallowed a lemon. One by one, residents raised their hands and asked questions. Why were we never told about this visual easement plan? Have other fines been issued without evidence? Is it true you tried to create a policy that lets you penalize properties without notifying owners first? Olivia tried to deflect, claiming it was just a draft and hadn't been finalized. That's when Mrs. Rojas, who'd lived in the neighborhood since the 80s, stood up and held up a photo of her own fine notice for a non-conforming fence. The fine, issued 3 weeks prior, had no photos, no explanation, and according to her, no follow-up. I called the office twice, she said. No one answered. Then I heard about this man's email, and now I know why. The room got quiet. Carl, the treasurer, cleared his throat. I moved to table all new enforcement actions until a full audit of past fines is completed by a third-party mediator. A few people clapped. Lena raised her hand. Seconded. They voted. The motion passed unanimously. Olivia didn't even look up. But the fallout didn't stop there. The next day, someone sent the entire packet of documents, including the voice memo, to a local community watchdog blog. The article went viral. A week later, a reporter from the city's Consumer Affairs Unit requested an interview with me. I agreed. "Why do you think the HOA president was pushing this policy?" the reporter asked. I didn't hedge. Because it gives them power without accountability. And people like Olivia don't want to manage a neighborhood. They want to control it. 3 days after that, the city attorney's office opened an investigation. Turns out, Olivia had issued over 30 fines in the past year without documentation. Several of them were for violations that didn't exist in the HOA charter. One homeowner had been fined 4 times for visual clutter because their kids left sidewalk chalk drawings out front. The city subpoenaed HOA records. When they checked the bank statements, things got worse. Several payments from residents, especially those who paid in cash, had been deposited into a separate account titled Emergency Beautification Fund. But no such fund existed in the HOA bylaws. The account had been opened under Olivia's name. That's when the police got involved. 2 unmarked sedans parked across from my house early Thursday morning. I watched from my kitchen window as 2 investigators from the city's Financial Crimes Unit stepped out, clutching leather portfolios and wearing the kind of expressions that didn't leave room for small talk. They didn't come to my door. They walked straight to the HOA clubhouse. By noon, Olivia's car was gone from her driveway. By 1, the clubhouse was locked and taped off with a printed notice from the city clerk's office. And by 5, a subpoena was posted publicly at the community bulletin board beside the pool entrance. It was official. The HOA's records were being seized for forensic audit. I didn't celebrate. Not yet. Because if Olivia was smart enough to keep this scheme going for over a year, she was smart enough to have an exit strategy. Sure enough, the next day, a new letter appeared in everyone's mailbox unsigned, but with the HOA letterhead. It claimed Olivia had voluntarily stepped down due to personal health reasons, and that the vice president, a man named Darren Lyle, would assume her duties temporarily. I'd never had much interaction with Darren. He was a quiet guy, former insurance adjuster, the kind of person who wore creased khakis to backyard barbecues. But when I showed up to the emergency board meeting that Saturday, he didn't look like someone grieving a friend's reputation. He looked like someone trying to steer a bus through a landslide. "Before we begin," he said, clearing his throat, "I want to be transparent. The city has requested all HOA correspondence, financial histories, and internal communications be turned over within the week. We're cooperating fully." He glanced at me just for a moment. "Furthermore," he continued, "we're suspending all enforcement actions past and pending until the investigation concludes." A murmur went through the crowd. No one applauded. No one booed. Everyone just stared, waiting for the next shoe to fall. It did. 3 days later, a county investigator knocked on my door. She introduced herself as Detective Worth, handed me a business card, and asked if I had a few minutes. We sat on the porch. She was blunt. "We believe, miss. Fairgrove diverted over $40,000 into a personal account over the past 18 months, mostly through falsified violations and cash-only payments." I nodded slowly. "That tracks." She also filed false maintenance work orders. Claimed contractors were paid for repairs that never happened. "We've contacted the contractors listed, none of them ever worked here." That explains the drainage improvements she cited last summer. There was never any work done. She also submitted receipts for landscaping equipment, Worth added, flipping open her notepad. "But the equipment was purchased with HOA funds and delivered to her brother's property in North Durham." I leaned back. "That's bold. It gets worse. We found a forged signature on a lien placed against one of your neighbors, Mr. Lipinski, on Hawthorne Court." I turned my gaze toward the eastern end of the neighborhood. Lipinski's house had been vacant for months. He was a retired machinist, soft-spoken and private. Olivia had claimed he left due to compliance issues. Worth followed my look. We traced the lien filing. It was submitted under a shell company registered to Olivia's maiden name. My jaw clenched. So she manufactured a lien to drive him out and take his house. That's what it looks like. I stood up, pacing the porch. He didn't even fight it, he just left. We've contacted his family, they're cooperating. If we can prove fraud, the county can nullify the lien and restore the title. She handed me a release form. You're one of the few residents who documented everything. Your video footage and records might help us reconstruct a timeline. Are you willing to make a formal statement? I didn't hesitate. Yes. Over the next week, I spent hours compiling digital files. I handed over every security cam clip, every email, every notice. Even the sound recording from that first meeting where Olivia withdrew my fine, once confronted with evidence. Worth thanked me and told me to stay available. By then, the neighborhood had changed. Lawns still got mowed, kids still rode bikes, but the tension that had coiled around the community for years was unraveling. People who used to keep their heads down started waving across the street. I saw Mrs. Rojas helping a younger couple paint their fence. Carl, the treasurer, started holding informal Q and as twice a week out of his garage, but the real shift came at the next General Assembly. Darren stood at the front of the community center gym, holding a printed financial report. We've conducted a preliminary audit, he began, voice steady. And we've identified over 50 fraudulent charges, landscaping, inspections, legal fees, all of them fabricated or redirected. He paused, then added, we're filing a civil suit against Olivia Fairgrove for embezzlement, fraud, and breach of fiduciary duty. No one clapped. But the silence was louder than any applause. A man in the back, a newer homeowner I didn't recognize, raised a hand. What happens now? Darren nodded toward me. Mr. Keller, would you mind addressing that? I hadn't expected that. I stood, still holding the notes I hadn't planned to use. We're forming a temporary oversight committee, I said. Volunteer-based. No one gets paid. Our job is to review every policy, every enforcement rule, and every financial process. Nothing moves forward without homeowner approval. A woman near the front, mid-40s, wore a school district badge, raised her hand. What about past fines being reviewed? I said. If they weren't supported by evidence or proper process, they'll be rescinded. And refunded. A few people glanced at each other, then a slow ripple of nods passed through the room. That night as I walked home, Lena caught up with me outside the pool gate. She ever say why she did it? She asked. Olivia. I shook my head. Greed, probably. Lena frowned. No. I mean, why she thought she'd get away with it. I looked out across the dark lawn, the clubhouse now quiet, the HOA sign missing its president's name. Because she thought no one would push back. Lena didn't say anything. She just nodded once and walked on. The next morning, news broke that Olivia had been arrested in Raleigh. She'd been hiding at a cousin's townhouse, using a prepaid phone and a fake name to avoid the warrant. Her brother, the one who took the landscaping equipment, was also picked up, facing charges for possession of stolen property and wire fraud. The county DA held a press conference that afternoon. Olivia would be charged with multiple felony counts, including grand larceny, forgery, and unlawful lien filing. The judge denied her bail. As for Lipinski, the man she drove out, he returned 3 weeks later. With the lien nullified and his title restored, he moved back in and was met with a surprise. Several neighbors had mowed his lawn, cleaned up debris, and restocked his fridge. Someone even repainted the gnome he used to keep on his porch. He didn't say much, just nodded and waved. I didn't need thanks. Neither did anyone else. We hadn't just taken down a bad president. We'd reclaimed our neighborhood. And for the first time in years, it felt like home again. The air around the neighborhood felt different by the time fall fully settled in. Mailboxes that once bore silent resentment now carried flyers for block parties and bake-offs. People left their garage doors open again. There was even a potluck calendar taped to the community board, where Olivia's framed welcome letter used to hang. But beneath that calm, the real work was just beginning. I took a seat in Carl's garage one evening, where the newly formed Oversight Committee held its first official review of the HOA's enforcement practices. 6 of us sat in folding chairs, a stack of violation notices piled high on the workbench. Carl passed out copies of the HOA's original charter, still dusted in the scent of toner. "You know how many of these fines were issued under aesthetic disruption?" Carl asked, flipping pages. "It's not even a defined term. There's no metric, no checklist, just vibes." Lena, now acting as interim secretary, leaned in. "We found over 70 of those. Most had no photos, no timestamps, just a scribble and a signature." The guy from the taco truck, whose name I finally learned was Archero, raised his hand. "How many people actually paid them?" I thumbed through the spreadsheet Darren had emailed me earlier that day. 62, some paid multiple. "That's over $18,000 we can't even trace through proper deposits." Carl opened a manila envelope and pulled out a letter from the city's finance office. "They're freezing the HOA's operating account while they verify fund misuse. We've got 2 weeks to submit a proposed budget if we want utilities, trash, and groundskeeping to continue uninterrupted." "I'll draft it," Lena said. "But we need to make sure anything we propose is transparent from the jump. Monthly reports, open books, the whole thing." Archero nodded. "And a way to refund people who paid fake fines, even if it's in waves." I tapped my pen against the table. "First, we need restitution from Olivia. If the court rules in our favor, we can use the recovered funds for refunds. Until then, we do what we can." Carl reached into the envelope again and handed me a copy of the civil lawsuit the committee had filed on behalf of the HOA. It was thick, over 40 pages, and listed charges that went far beyond what we'd initially uncovered. Wire fraud, racketeering, tampering with public documents. The county had even added a charge of elder financial abuse after Lipinski's niece submitted a sworn affidavit about how Olivia had threatened to escalate legal consequences if he didn't vacate. But what really hit me was the last page, a list of names. Each one a resident who had filed a formal complaint against Olivia in the past 2 years. 37 total. Every one of them had been silenced, fined, or intimidated into compliance. That was the real damage. The next week, I was summoned to testify before the county grand jury. The courthouse was a 40-minute drive, and I spent most of it rehearsing my statement aloud, rehearsing what I'd say when asked why I'd installed the cameras, why I'd pushed back, why I hadn't let it go. In the courtroom, I wore the same flannel shirt I'd had on the day Olivia first slapped the fine notice on my garage. Seemed fitting. The prosecutor was a sharp woman named Eileen Morrow. No preamble, no small talk, just questions. "Mr. Keller, to your knowledge, were any of the fines issued against you accompanied by supporting documentation?" "No," I said. "None. I asked for photos, inspection reports, got nothing." She nodded. "And when you confronted Miss Fairgrove with evidence, how did she respond?" She dismissed it. "Until I showed her the plat map and footage, then she backed off, but only in private." Eileen turned to the jury. "Did she ever admit the fine was unlawful?" "Yes, at a board meeting, I recorded it." She played the audio clip. Olivia's voice filled the courtroom, clipped and defensive, followed by the unmistakable sound of me asking for written withdrawal. The room was silent when it ended. Eileen stepped closer. "Did you ever receive retaliation from Miss Fairgrove following that meeting?" "No." "But not because she backed down. Because I exposed the draft policy she was pushing to give herself unchecked authority over private property." The jurors scribbled notes. When I stepped down, Eileen gave me a nod of acknowledgement, not gratitude exactly, but something sharper. Respect. Over the next month, more residents gave testimony. Contractors admitted they'd been paid in cash and told not to record their jobs. A junior accountant from the HOA's previous auditor revealed that Olivia had rejected his request to flag irregular deposits. Even Darren, the interim president, testified about the intimidation tactics Olivia had used to keep board members in line, threats of community backlash. Anonymous complaints she claimed she'd handle personally. The trial date was set for early spring. In the meantime, the Oversight Committee got to work. We rewrote the enforcement guidelines from the ground up. No more vague language. Every violation now required time-stamped evidence, a signed inspection form, and a homeowner response window before any action could be taken. We held public forums every Saturday in the community park. Kids played tag while their parents asked questions about how to file appeals, how to reach the new compliance officers, how to volunteer for committees. People brought folding chairs and thermoses of coffee. Someone set up a speaker and played classic rock. We weren't just fixing the system. We were rebuilding it. When the trial finally began, the courthouse was packed. Local news vans lined the street. Olivia arrived in a beige suit and sunglasses, flanked by a defense attorney who looked like he'd rather be anywhere else. She pled not guilty. Eileen didn't flinch. She opened with the footage of Olivia taping the fine notice to my garage. Then she moved to the forged lien documents, the fake vendor reports, and the recreation of the hidden bank account trail. But the moment that broke the dam was when Mr. Lipinski took the stand. He walked slowly, using a cane, but his voice was steady. "She told me if I didn't pay, she'd have the association seize my home," he said. "She said I was too old to keep up with the property, that I was a liability to the neighborhood." Eileen held up the forged lien. "Is this your signature, Mr. Lipinski?" "No," he said. "That's not my handwriting." "I never signed anything." His niece sat behind him, eyes red. The defense tried to argue that Olivia had simply misinterpreted her authority, that she believed she was acting in the community's best interest. But the jury didn't buy it. After 6 days of testimony, they returned a unanimous verdict, guilty on all counts. The judge sentenced her to 8 years in state prison, with no parole for the first 4. Restitution was ordered in the full amount of misappropriated funds, plus damages. The courtroom erupted in quiet applause, not celebration, but relief. As Olivia was led away in cuffs, she didn't look at anyone. Not me, not Lipinski, not the board members she'd manipulated. Just stared straight ahead like the world had done her wrong, but the world had simply caught up. That night, we held a gathering in the community park. Not a party. Just neighbors, lawn chairs, and a grill Archero rolled in from his driveway. Someone brought a projector and played an old movie on the side of Carl's garage. Lipinski sat beside me, sipping a ginger ale. He didn't say much, just looked around at the kids laughing near the swings, the couples holding hands under the string lights we'd finally gotten approved. "You did good, kid," he said finally. I shook my head. "We all did." He nodded once, and we sat there, listening to the sounds of a neighborhood finally exhaling after years of holding its breath. No more threats, no more fines, just people living like they were meant to, together.